Adi Carmi, former senior officer with the Israeli Shabak, Internal Security Service, thank you so much for joining us today. So we're seeing yet another wave of terrorism with a bigger challenge to both the Shabak and the Israeli army. What can Israel do, what Israel should do to stop it?
אנחנו נמצאים באמת בפיק של גל טרור נוסף.
Well, at the moment, we're at the peak of yet another terror wave, with multiple attacks and casualties. I'd like to mention that since the beginning of this year, 2023, Israeli security service prevented 375 terror attacks, 300 of them shooting attacks. 147 shooting attacks were actually carried out since the beginning of the year. So Israel will have to decide whether to keep going in the current direction, precise intelligence, surgical operations against terrorist cells, or taking more physical control of the territory and the main roads where Israelis and Palestinians travel on a daily basis. At the end of the day, there's never 100% when dealing with security and intelligence. We cannot prevent all attacks, and numbers are unprecedented compared to anywhere else in the world.
So Adi, let's look at the two opportunities, two options that you put here. One, to keep on with the same way of getting in and out following accurate intelligence, and the other one, taking advantage, taking control on a large area and going from house to house like we've seen 20 years ago. Let's look at the pros and cons, the pluses and the minuses of each option.
I do not see a scenario in which Israel takes control of the territory as we did 20 years ago in Operation Defensive Shield. There is no terror infrastructure to justify this sort of action at this point. Yes, there are terrorist hubs that we are aware of, like inside Jenin refugee camp or in Nablus. We need to ask ourselves if we are ready to move in and take full military control of those cities. Israel will have to address this question. That aside, the state of Israel does not disrupt daily lives of Palestinians. Roads are open, movement is not limited in any way. The number of checkpoints has been drastically reduced across the West Bank. So for the everyday Palestinian worker who goes out and provides for his family, movement is relatively easy. This may change as a result of these latest attacks. If terrorists are able to cross, get to a gas station in the town of Eli, blend in areas where there are many people, lots of cars, shooting attacks can become easy if we don't have the precise intelligence. Another point I'd like to make is the illegal weapons we're dealing with. Lots of ammunition in Palestinian civilian hands, which is also unprecedented compared to anywhere else in the world. Every other person across the PA is armed. It could be a makeshift weapon or a standard. Yes, it can be used at weddings to fire in the air according to their local tradition, but it also can be used for terrorism.
Why now? It didn't start yesterday, but about a year and a half ago, that wave started. Why now? And why the Palestinian Authority does not stop it? Because at the end of the day, if Israel needs to go inside because of an internal decision or because it is being forced to by many terror attacks which unluckily succeed and many casualties, the first instrument to pay the price will be the Palestinian Authority.
I think it's an excellent question. The answer lies within. The Palestinian Authority lost control of the northern West Bank, mainly the Jenin area. They lost grip because they pretty much surrendered control over to Hamas, because when the PA had to act against Hamas, use force against its own people, they avoided doing that. Their polls show that if there were elections to be held today, Hamas would easily win across the West Bank. That's why Abu Mazen canceled the latest election a few years ago. The PA is a sort of friend and foe. On one side, they have their hawks from the Fatah party, armed factions that we allowed, and that one day may use those weapons against us. And on the other side, they're supposed to be preventing terror attacks and ensure security of everyday Palestinian civilians. And they do not. In places where they actually do that, such as southern parts of the greater Jerusalem area, there's calm. I don't want to jinx it because we did have attacks in this area, but like the ones we saw here in the past year, that's a different story.
But Adi, if the Palestinian Authority loses ground to the Hamas, on the field, at the end of the day, it will end up like in Gaza. They will take their officers and throw them from high-story buildings, take over the Palestinian Authority, and make it Hamastan like we see in Gaza. No democracy, no rights, a control with power, extreme Islam. What's good in it for the people in the West Bank and for the Palestinian Authority?
נכון. גם יותר מזה.
It's more than that. The Palestinians are not debating who their next leader is going to be. There's great uncertainty, and no one knows who is going to take over from Abbas, who is approaching the age of 90. But one more thing that needs to be said about the Palestinians. They are constantly walking on a thin line. Israel will not by any means accept a Hamas takeover in the West Bank. What happened in Gaza cannot happen in the West Bank. We will not allow it. Rocket fire from Nablus, from Tulkarem and Jenin will harm Israel's security tremendously. We will have to act swiftly and decisively to prevent such a scenario at all costs. And I hope we never reach this point.
So
on one hand, we want to see democracy in the West Bank. We want to see them flourish and earn money and live open lives. On the other hand, if they elect Hamas, we will not let it happen.
Unfortunately, I cannot point to a single Arab nation as a democratic state. I can say that the only Arabs who are living in a democracy are the ones living in Israel. The Palestinian Authority learned from Israel, and to some extent they are following our model of economics, some private freedoms, etc. But the patriarchy, the tribal culture, those things are stronger than any democracy. So between the red line of not allowing Hamas to take over and the lower marker of preventing terror attacks, there's a wide range of actions the PA can take. Israel has to decide if we're acting to prevent friction, because this is the key word for me. Friction. How can we prevent friction between Palestinians and about 500,000 Jews living in the West Bank?
Yes, but I want to stick with the Palestinians because it's the second time you mentioned that you have to try and separate between the Jewish population and the Arab population. If you do so, and Israel had to do so quite a few times in the past, if you do so, obviously the Palestinians will be it will be less convenient for them to commute between cities, sometimes impossible. It will be harder for them to work, they will earn less. It will push people who won't be able to work and commute to terrorism, so we are in lose-lose.
I would like to separate those who work inside Israel from the other ones, because the ones who have work permits undergo a long series of security checks to get the permits. We know exactly who they are. Those who do not hold them are basically free to move within the Palestinian territory. We do not know if someone is going to act in Jenin, and those people are off the radar, so to speak. So we need to reduce friction. How do we do that? Well, a detour road is a good example. The road around the village of Hawara was approved 4 years ago, and still nothing is done by the previous government and not by the current government. This road alone could have prevented several terror attacks. We experienced this year. This separation will not be pleasant for the normal Palestinians, but it will prevent terror attacks and save Israeli lives.
One more thing that we're seeing after every wave of terror attacks is retaliation by extreme Jewish people. We saw it after the last attack in Eli, we saw it in the past, and that obviously creates more hostility on the ground. What can Israel do? What should Israel do to stop that?
I think Israel should make all the efforts to expand cooperation with the Palestinian Authority. I think consciousness, education, even Palestinian social media has a great effect. And I'm hopeful that Palestinians also understand this point, because copycats are dangerous and can produce more terror down the line.
And on the Israeli side, with the extreme Jewish,
Israel has absolute zero tolerance towards Israeli citizens who break the law. Anyone who is acting against innocent people will be dealt according to the principles and procedures of a democratic state.
You know, many people see us now around the world. It looks to them like two tribes fighting far away. And obviously they look at the Palestinians as the poor, right side, and at Israel as the side who conquers the ground, rules other people, etc., etc. If you were to speak now to Americans, Europeans, and others and tell them the Israeli story, what would you tell?
מדינת ישראל מקדשת את
We
החיים.
praise life here in Israel. We have no desire to inflict harm on peaceful Palestinians who just wish to live their lives. Having said that, the main ingredient in any Palestinians' factions, the Hamas Jihad, even Fatah, agenda is the destruction of Israel. And until they don't change that, until they stop teaching hate and incitement in schools and in kindergartens, stop glorifying murderers, we're destined to live on our sword here.
אנחנו, נגזר עלינו להיאבק בטרור.
One last question, Adi. We saw during last Passover how all fronts unite. We fight in the West Bank, it goes to Gaza, it goes to the north, both Syria and Lebanon. Obviously that, it is still in the minds of the high-ranked officers in the Shabak, in the army, the defense minister, the prime minister. What should Israel do to defer all fronts?
מדינת ישראל פועלת
We act in Lebanon and in Syria, anywhere terrorists are planning to harm us. We have a national interest to separate those arenas and not enter into war on multiple fronts at once. We need to act more efficiently and not split our forces. Iran's interest is the exact opposite, to activate proxies from Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza, even the West Bank. And that makes it into a complicated chess game, spanning all over the Middle East. And I think, so far, we're doing a good job.
Adi Carmi, thank you so much for this interview.